Every day, modern enterprises execute millions of critical operations. Pricing tiers, tax calculations, compliance approvals, and eligibility requirements are governed by thousands of rigid documents, spreadsheets, and contracts. But those human-readable rules don't execute themselves. Development teams have to manually translate that dense policy text into operational logic, scattering it across the organization. Because this translation is manual and decentralized, a single corporate policy often ends up hard-coded into a workflow tool, a custom application, and an enterprise resource planning, or ERP system. Ask all three systems for a pricing decision, and you get three different answers. When a regulation changes, finding and updating every isolated instance of that rule takes months. Worse, when an auditor asks why a specific decision was made, there is rarely a clear mathematical or historical record to show them. Manual translation leaves organizations with a brittle architecture. The logic is too disconnected to scale and too opaque to trust. Now introduce autonomous AI agents into that environment. Enterprises are deploying these agents to speed up workflows and handle those exact pricing and compliance tasks. But feeding a generative language model a complex 50-page tax regulation and asking it to make a live financial decision is incredibly risky. The model improvises, it guesses. It produces oscillating, unpredictable outputs instead of a stable, verifiable result. Large language models are highly effective at understanding context, drafting text, and orchestrating workflows. They lack the structural consistency required to apply strict, regulated business logic. Organizations need the speed and capability of AI agents, but they must surround those agents with absolute deterministic boundaries. Sertainly is a unified decision infrastructure that solves this by physically separating the artificial intelligence from the runtime execution. It uses AI to build decisions, not to improvise them in production. The process starts by ingesting your complex source material, contracts, rate tables, and policy manuals, into a curated analytical scope called a sourcebook. During this build phase, an AI assistant analyzes the documents. It maps out variables, identifies edge cases, and drafts highly structured, testable business requirements based entirely on the text. Before any code is generated, a subject matter expert reviews those requirements. The human approves the exact rules of engagement. By restricting AI strictly to this build phase, organizations safely convert ambiguous policy documents into explicit, testable intent without exposing production systems to generative risk. Once the requirements are locked, an agentic worker drafts the executable logic using Sertainly's precise business decision language. This drafted code then hits the wedge. This is a deterministic acceptance test gate that runs the logic against hundreds of generated scenarios. It rejects any logic that doesn't perfectly match the approved requirements. The compiler iterates in a closed loop, diagnosing failures and rewriting the code until it passes every single structural and logical test. The passing logic is then frozen and deployed as an immutable REST API package. This package is permanently tied to the exact version of the source material it was built from. Because it passed the wedge, the final decision package contains 0 generative AI dependencies. When called, it executes the identical sequence of operations every single time. At runtime, an enterprise system sends a structured case object to the Sertainly API, for example, a customer profile and a transaction date. This diagram shows how the API structures the response. Sertainly doesn't force complex policies into a basic approved or denied verdict. Instead, it returns a shape-neutral business outcome across 6 independent channels: facts, tags, routes, reason codes, evidence needed, and status. In a single millisecond, the API can calculate a specific tax amount in the facts channel, assign a regulatory category in the tax channel, and use the evidence channel to request a missing residency certificate. Every response also includes a trace identifier. This is a direct pointer back to the specific rules evaluated, the inputs used, and the exact version of the source document that governed the outcome. The combination of multi-channel outputs and cryptographic traceability provides total visibility, proving exactly how and why a decision was made. Sertainly sits beneath the application layer, serving as a centralized, common decision runtime for the entire enterprise organization. This architectural layout shows traditional configure, price, quote portals, legacy ERP systems, and modern AI agents, all querying the exact same Sertainly API pillar. You no longer duplicate policy logic across different platforms. When you integrate AI into your workforce, the agent's job is to gather context and orchestrate the conversation. Sertainly holds the authority to make the actual policy decision. Organizations can now scale their AI deployments safely, resting on a unified infrastructure that guarantees every automated decision is deterministic, compliant, and fully traceable.